There are lots of different lube options out there and it can be pretty confusing. So in this video, I'm going to go through the different types, explain their broad advantages and disadvantages, when best to use the different types of lube, and give you some tips on how to apply them. With this knowledge, you should be able to have a more efficient drivetrain and your components should last significantly longer, saving you money. The three main types that we would recommend are immersive waxing, a drip-on wax, and a wet lube. Now, I'm going to begin by talking about immersive waxing because this is without doubt the single best thing that you can do to your chain. It's the best all-round thing to do because it makes your chain more efficient. What does that mean? Well, it saves you watts, meaning that you can go faster for the same amount of effort. Now, the amount that you can save is considered hugely significant by those who are chasing performance gains because, as a rule of thumb, it's around 5 watts. But the exact amount that you do save from waxing your chain over using a drip-on lube will vary depending on what you were using before, the state of your chain. There's a lot of variables, but it can be more than 5 watts because if you take a worst-case scenario whereby you're riding in dirty, dusty conditions and you have a wax chain at the end of a long ride, that chain is going to be so much more efficient than one that's got a typical, well, standard sort of wet lube on it. And that's because waxed chains attract far less dirt, which means that they stay more mechanically efficient for longer. Wet lubes are stickier, they attract more dirt, that develops a grinding paste, which just makes your drivetrain less mechanically efficient. But in addition to that, it causes premature and accelerated rates of wear. And this is one of the key things about immersive chain waxing, because it doesn't attract as much dirt. Independent tests have shown that treating your chain with wax will cause it to last easily up to 3 times longer than just using drip-on lubes. And for that reason, it's not just for time trialists or marginal gain hunters. It's for everyone, because it will make your components last longer and save you money in the long run. The big disadvantage of chain waxing is that it takes time to apply, and not everyone has that time. The first time you do it, it definitely takes longer, and the more you do it, the quicker you get the process down. But it's still going to take in the region of 15 to 30 minutes in my experience, and not everyone has that time to be able to do that. The other big disadvantage of it is if you're racing in wet conditions or prolonged rain, then the wax is water soluble. That's actually an advantage of it because it means you can take your chain off your bike, and if you want to clean it, you can just use boiling water out of a kettle, and that will help clean and strip off dirty wax and any residue that's stuck to it. But if you are riding in those prolonged wet conditions, like I say, the wax is going to wash off and it's going to mean that your chain becomes less efficient. But riding off-road in dry conditions, dusty conditions, such as maybe the Unbound gravel race, for example, then waxing is the best way to go. It might sound counterintuitive for off-road, but it's because it attracts less dirt, it's gonna stand you in much greater stead. Also, if you are riding in conditions where, say, it's only going to be showers, it's going to rain a little bit, the wax should shrug that off and it's still going to be the best all-round option. Or maybe if it's just a short race in the rain, like a time trial, again, waxing would be the way to go. So we use Silka Wax, but there are several other different alternative brands of immersive waxes out there. And if you want to see how to treat your chain with an immersive wax, then we have a dedicated video that can show you how to do that because it is quite an involved process. Now, next is a drip-on wax. Now, these are really useful. They often contain the same low friction additives that are found in the, well, immersive wax treatment, but they're much quicker and easier to apply. So in the case of this one, it contains tungsten disulfide, the same as this, which helps fill in and smooth out the metal plates, pins and rollers that are on your chain. The big advantage is how quick they are to apply. You can simply just drip them on across the top of the chain like a normal drip-on lube. But because they're being dripped on, you don't quite get the same penetration of those low friction additives right into the core of the chain, into the links and rollers. You don't get as much penetration as you do with a hot immersive wax, where you leave the chain in that hot melt wax for 10 minutes. As a result, The chain isn't quite as mechanically efficient as using a full-on wax treatment, but it's much quicker and easier to do. Top tip, to get better penetration of any drip-on lube when you apply it to a bicycle chain, I would suggest putting the bike into its cross-chained positions. Biggie big. This is the only time that that's allowed, but in doing so it will strain the chain slightly, open up the links a bit more, and help that lube just permeate into the links and rollers that little bit better. A key thing to bear in mind with many drip-on waxers such as this is that they're often designed to be applied the night before, and they have to dry before you can ride your bike. So the reason for this is because the low friction additives are dissolved in a water-based carrier, which needs to evaporate and leave those low friction additives and the wax behind in order for them to work properly. And so you apply it the night before, and then that's able to dry and you're good to go. This is fine, but just be aware that that's not always a practical solution. So for example, if you're in a really long endurance ride and you need to reapply some lubricant to your bike, you can't really do it as you ride with a drip-on wax like this. It's not designed for that. So something which you can do, which gets you 99% of the sort of, well, frictional gains of waxing your chain, is to simply maintain it using a drip-on wax. So what you do is wipe off the exterior of the chain with a bit of warm water and a cloth so that you remove excess sort of dirt that's on the outside of the chain. This stops that dirt being carried into the links and rollers and causing wear and decreasing the drivetrain efficiency. And then simply apply the drip-on lube on top of the wax chain to sort of top it up. And that way you can keep going for a long time with a wax chain. If you're riding in prolonged rain though, much the same with waxing, then I wouldn't recommend using a drip-on lube as the optimum choice because it will wash off. That said, it doesn't wash off straight away. So with any kind of waxing, if you're going to be doing a race that's maybe damp conditions, like a time trial, but it's short, then I would still go with either a drip-on wax or an immersive wax, simply because the efficiency gains are so much better and it doesn't attract that dirt. But if you're doing, say, a multi-day event, we might want to look at a wet lube. If you live in a wet climate or are just trying to endure a British winter, then a good wet lube is probably the way to go. The reason for this is that although it does attract more dirt than waxing, and it is also less mechanically efficient, there are situations in which this does become more mechanically efficient than waxing. And that's because, well, the waxes get washed off. Also, it's possible that when the waxes get washed off, your chain becomes a lot more prone to rusting, especially if you live in a damp environment like the UK. If you're going to be doing a long endurance event or a multi-day ride where you're likely to be encountering wet conditions at some point, a wet lube is a good way to go. There are a few reasons for this. Firstly, it can be applied on the fly. So there are instances when riders have been in really wet stages of, say, a grand tour, and they're getting towards the end of that stage and they start to hear their drivetrain getting quite noisy. You can then actually just have a little bottle in your pocket and just reach down and put a bit of lube on, or just stop at the side of the road and quickly apply some, and it's real quick. And the other reason is that a good quality wet lube typically will last longer on the chain than a wax treatment, which will require a shorter service interval. So, I mean, it's how long is a piece of string, how long is it going to last, but typically you're looking, you know, maybe 200, 300 kilometers with a wax treatment in my experience, versus a wet lube, which could last significantly longer than that. A word of caution though, and that is do not over apply any kind of lube, especially wet lubes. Over applying any lube, it can really kill the efficiency that it potentially offers. This is again because of that dirt collecting capacity. So whenever you apply any drip-on lube, what you're looking to do is just have the lube just on the pins and rollers on the inside of the chain. That's where it needs to be, not on the outside of the chain. There it's just attracting dirt and causing a mess. And the other thing to be aware of is that not all lubes are created equal, especially so when it comes to wet lubes. And one of the big differentiators between the best and the worst, and the difference between the best and the worst is a lot, is how much dirt they attract. Now, there are lots of independent resources out there that have tested this and looked at the efficiencies of lubes, especially over time, and how much dirt they attract. And we are sponsored by Silca, full disclosure to you guys, but independent tests, such as those by Zero Friction Cycling, do suggest that Silca's Synergetic Wet Lube is one of the best out there, and that is because it doesn't attract anywhere near as much dirt as some of the others, which seem to just turn your chain black after several minutes of riding in wet conditions. So there you have it. That's the sort of long and short of the different chain lube options out there that I'd suggest you consider. For a summer bike, a best stay bike, or a bike that you race on, 100% I'd say go with waxing. Or if you just on a normal bike, even a commuter bike, if you live in a dry climate, waxing definitely is what I would do. But if you live somewhere like the UK where it rains seemingly all the time, even in summer, there's a more day-to-day solution for your training bike or just a bike you go and ride on or commuting. You might want to look at a wet lube. But yeah, if you've got any questions about any sort of intricacies of drivetrain friction or lubing drivetrains, let us know in the comments section down below, because we are going to be joined in a few weeks by Josh from Silca, who is an expert on all things lubrication on bikes. So we'll be able to put those questions to him. I hope you found this useful and informative, and if you have, well, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to support the channel and what we do for more useful information, well, subscribe if you haven't already. Love you, bye.